Hi, this is Julia M. Spencer. Thank you so much for tuning in into WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. Thank you so much for tuning in to my premiere show here, Real Estate Real Talk with Julia M. Spencer. And with this show, we will be exploring the world of real estate, the real world of real estate. And with that, I want to add, I am a brand new host. This is only my third or fourth time in a radio station, so I'm very, very excited to be here. I'm very glad that I've been given the opportunity to speak on the air about some of the things that I know. I have been investing in real estate for many years, actually decades. I've been a landlord, a tenant, an investor. I do all kinds of ways of skinning the cat of real estate investing. And I want to share some of my knowledge. And the reason this actually came about is one of my friends, actually several of my friends, have asked me in the past to share my knowledge. And I kind of just kept it in my head. And one of my friends said it's a crime to keep it there. So it's time to talk about some of these things and kind of share that with you. And hopefully you can get some useful information out of some of the things that I know. So with this very first show, I want to talk about the great world of tenants and landlords, something that we can probably all relate to. Unless you are really lucky and you inherited the real estate that you live in, we all have to live somewhere. We have to either be tenants or we have to be landlords, or we're living with somebody in maybe a living community of several people. And of course, dealing with lots of people together, there's always going to be problems. And sometimes there's ways to basically get along, and other times there's ways not to get along. And I've had many, many years experience of being a landlord. I've also been a tenant. I'm actually both of those things simultaneously right now. So I want to talk a little bit about leases, about some of the things that landlords can do to attract good tenants and keep them, and also some of the things that if you're a tenant that you can do to get some of the things done that you want your landlord to do for you, and also how you can communicate with your landlord. And of course, I want to also share some of the stories from my many years of being a landlord, some of the horror stories, which will be quite entertaining, I'm sure. And also some of the stories that, some of the good stories, because I obviously also have some very good experiences with being a landlord and a tenant. So with that, I just want to take a really brief break and also say that I am not a real estate agent. I don't work for any real estate agency. I'm not affiliated with anyone. I'm also not an attorney, so the advice that you get from me here, you need to verify it with legal counsel if it has something to do with some legal matters or real estate agent matters. These are all my opinions and stemming from lots of experience from many years of having done this in the past. So I'm very blessed to be here to be able to share that with you. And at this same time, I wanted to also tell you to email me if you have any questions, if you want me to discuss anything. Also, if you have any kinds of stories about being a landlord or a tenant that you want to share on the show in the future, or that you want me to address and basically give you my opinion, or maybe even bring somebody in that can give maybe a better view on these things for maybe a matter that I don't know that much about. And my email address is very easy to remember. It's realeestate@juliamspencer.com. You're welcome to communicate with me whenever you have a chance. And let's just dive right into the topic. So why do I even have any kind of experience with being a landlord? It probably doesn't seem to you from my voice that I'm very old, but I do have actually many, many years, actually over 2 decades of experience of being a landlord, which is sort of sad, but it's also a good thing because it got me to where I am today, and I'm very happy about being here. But how did I even get all this experience? How is this going to be useful to you? Well, some of my background is the fact that I actually went to school for something completely different that has nothing to do with real estate whatsoever. And I kind of fell into becoming a real estate investor, or actually landlord, at first by accident. And that is because I had purchased my first property when I was 23 and almost immediately had to move because of a job that I got here in Georgia. I was actually living in Florida at the time. And at that time, I am just like many first homeowners. I'm like, okay, I got my first home. Woo, I want to keep it. I don't want to get rid of it. I want to keep my home. Even though I can't live in it right now, I'm just going to make it a rental, and someday I'll come back to it. That someday, of course, usually never comes. But in this case, I was married to a military person, and we had to move. We had to pack up and go within 6 months of me buying my very first property. So by accident, I became a landlord. And of course, being a very zealous person about my first real estate, I wanted to do everything by myself. I didn't want a property manager. I didn't want anybody messing around with my property, and I wanted to do it perfectly right. So I very quickly got thrown into the fact that I had to learn how to write leases, how to learn the laws as they pertain to tenant landlord laws. And I also had to learn how to deal with people very closely, and to make sure that my tenants are happy, that my property is in good repair and maintenance. And I also learned how to be a landlord from a distance, which was kind of hard to do at first, but eventually I got the hang of it. And after many, many years, let me just add to this that if you're becoming a landlord for the very first time, or you have to move and leave your real estate, do not manage your property by yourself the first time. This is the one very good piece of advice I can give you. Always try to seek a good property management company at first. Now, if you have done this before, maybe you have some experience with maybe previous people. Like in my case, I actually had my parents who had several units in my home where I grew up, and one of them was rented out. So I had a little bit of experience with tenants and with landlords and with the laws at that time. So I had a little bit of experience, but in all hindsight, in the perfect hindsight that we have later on, I should have gotten a property manager. And that's going to actually open a whole nother topic later on, because I can talk extensively about good and bad property management companies and the things that you need to watch out for. But in my case, I became a property manager to my own property, and I had to learn very, very quickly. So my property was in Florida, I was here in Georgia, and I had to make it work somehow. So what are some of the things that I learned along the way that I should have known back then, that I didn't know back then, but I know now, that would have helped me to keep my tenants very happy and to actually attract the good tenants to begin with and keep them for a long time, and not get these bad ones that I've had. And I'm going to actually tell you, so if you stay on and you're tuned in and you're listening, I hope you stay on, because I have some very interesting stories to share of one of the worst experiences I've had and one of the best ones, which you can make both of them happen for sure. So if you're a brand new landlord, the two very most important things that you need to know if you want to make the whole endeavor successful are really to find a tenant first that pays the rent on time, and second, takes care of your property. Really, nothing else matters. If you have a tenant that kind of mouths off at you, or isn't very nice to you, or you have some attitude issues with that person, or you're just not communicating very good, I can tell you from experience, many years of experience, the only two things that really matter is if they pay the rent on time and if they take care of your property. The deal will fall apart if either one of those do not fit. And the thing with being a landlord, if you have a tenant that basically just comes and rents your place for a couple months and then leaves, or even just a year, and you have to turn over the property, you have to get it ready between your tenants, and you have to possibly even remodel and change things, There's a time frame between tenants where the property is empty. These are all things that cost you money as a landlord. You want to avoid those at all costs. And there's a couple of ways that I've discovered over the years that are conducive to basically attract these tenants that stay for a long time and that take care of your property. And the first thing that I found that always kept my tenants happy, I found good tenants that way and kept my tenants very happy, is to offer them a lease purchase option. Now, I know what you're going to say right now, lease purchase options. No, I don't want to get rid of my real estate. I want to keep it forever. But you can. You're just giving them an option. And let me just describe to you what a lease purchase option is. You're basically writing a lease to your tenant that they can lease your property for a certain amount of time, with a little clause in the bottom of the lease basically telling them that they can purchase the property at some point in the future, and they will have basically the first dibs at purchasing it. So you're not going to list it with a real estate agent and offer it to the whole world to see and buy. You're going to offer it to your tenant first. And you can even go as far as to pre-agree with your tenant on the price that he or she can pay, so that price doesn't change over the term of the lease. And in some cases, you can even offer them to make some sort of down payment in order to ensure this lease purchase option. And let me just give you an example, because I've actually done that before. There was a property back in Georgia. Actually, at the time I was living in Warner Robins, Georgia. There's really large Air Force base there, so the community there is mostly military families, and the property that I had my eye on is very cheap property, and one of my co-workers really wanted to purchase a home. He had a family, a couple of kids. They had a kind of sort of a hard time to get a loan, so they approached me to see if I would buy the property basically for them and get the financing, and then lease it to them with a lease purchase option, so that at some point in the future, when they were able to get the financing themselves, they could then purchase the property. And this is not a property that I chose. I didn't want to buy this one particular one. It was a fixer-upper, and it actually would have cost me a lot of money to fix it up. But in this case, the agreement was that the tenant would fix it up themselves however they choose, using their own funds and money as they were moving in as tenants, and then have later on the option, obviously, to buy it. And we did it exactly that way, and I did require my tenant to pay a couple of $1,000s of a lease purchase option fee for me signing that lease purchase option, and they moved in there, and everything went well for a while. The good thing about lease purchase options, there's actually two things. For the tenants, the good thing was that they were able to make the changes to the house that they wanted without getting any special approvals from me, for example, for the colors that they chose to paint the rooms or any kind of flooring options. Whatever else they wanted to do in there, I was pretty much okay with. The house was in sort of kind of bad shape. It was a fixer-upper, so it needed a lot of work anyways, and I was glad there was somebody there that was doing the work and it wasn't me. But for me, the good thing was the property was still in my name. I could still make the tax deductions. I could still claim any kind of losses that I had on the property. And of course, if you're a real estate investor, as I was starting off at the time as a brand new real estate investor, I was still learning how to do my tax returns as a real estate investor. And I discovered very quickly if I kept ownership of the property, I could actually deduct the insurance, I could deduct the taxes, any kind of expenses I had on the property, in addition to any of the costs that I had to close on the property, closing costs, the attorney costs, and things like that, any kind of lawn care costs that I was paying for. I could deduct all of these things, which would create for me a paper loss, basically a loss for the tax return purposes. But the really cool thing about being a real estate investor, and you're going to hear me say this a lot on all of my shows, which is one of the best things actually that was ever invented, is depreciation expenses. And the reason depreciation expenses are awesome for real estate investors are you can deduct them on your tax return, but they're not actually a hey, I'm dishing money out to you in forms of actual cash. And that's just the way the tax system works here in the United States. It's a really cool thing. A real estate property can be depreciated over a certain amount of years. You basically take the price of the property that you paid minus the land and divide it over a certain amount of years, and then you deduct that amount every year on your taxes without actually having paid it. And of course, the person that pays it is your tenant, because they pay rent to you. So somebody else pays for an expense that you can deduct on your tax return. That's a pretty cool thing if you ask me. So you need to get more of those. At least that was my thinking at the time, and it worked out pretty good for me. So the good thing about lease purchase options and agreements was, obviously, as I mentioned, the tenant was able to make the changes that they wanted. They were able to get the house that they wanted, even though they were not able to get the financing. And for me, as the owner, I had all kinds of really cool deductions that I could take. At the time, I had a full-time job working in a completely different field, and I was paying a lot of taxes. So I was very happy to get the tax deductions that I needed to not have to dish out so much to Uncle Sam for my taxes. And one additional thing that's an awesome thing about lease purchase options is the fact that when you get tenants that actually want to get into this agreement with you, lease purchase options, they want to generally stay in the house, of course, for a long time. So you can actually sign leases with them that are longer than a year. 1 year is usually the lease amount that's kind of the minimum for any kind of long-term leases. So if you can get somebody to sign a lease purchase agreement with you, then you can offer them 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 year leases, which is very awesome because, as I mentioned in the beginning of the show, the least turnover you have, the more money you will save as a landlord, and the least output you'll have in between tenants. But let's talk a little bit about some other ways of how I've attracted really awesome tenants in my last 20 years of being a landlord, and some of the things that I've done. So one other thing that I've done is I have actually advertised 1 month off rent for any kind of tenant that can pay a significant amount of the year-long lease upfront. And I've had a lot of success with this. This is probably one of the easiest thing to do, and it's the most overlooked one. And if you're a tenant and you're listening to this right now, maybe you're close to renegotiating a lease with your landlord right now, or you have a lease that's about to expire, approach your landlord or your property management company and ask them, hey, if I sign a lease and I pay you, like, say, 6 months up front, can you give me a month off or half a month off? And if I was the landlord, I would be very happy with this. If I can get any amount of money up front, I'm very, very happy camper landlord. I don't have to worry about chasing my tenants down, collecting the money from them, sending them late notices, and all this stuff is immediately eliminated. You have basically security that you're going to get your rent every single time on time. You have it up front. And it's an awesome thing. It's also an awesome thing if you have tenants that have very bad credit, but they still want to qualify to rent your property. A lot of times, and some of the things that property management companies do, they will check your credit and they do a background check. Of course, background check has nothing to do with finances. Usually they're just checking to see if you have a criminal record, or if you have owed money to other landlords, or there's any kind of criminal judgments against you that could maybe interfere with other people living in your building or in the area. It's just generally people you don't want to have renting from you. And by the way, there's laws for certain things that you can't discriminate about, and I will talk about those sometime in the future. But so the background check is something that has nothing to do with the finances, but they will do a credit check. And if you as a tenant have really bad credit for whatever reason, but you offer your landlord a couple months ahead of time in rent, they usually kind of overlook that and you don't need to worry about it. And another thing that you can offer your landlord as well is to just, even if you can't make the payments up front, the whole entire year's worth of lease payments up front, you can actually just write them checks for each month that your lease is the duration of your lease, basically, and give all those checks to your landlord or your property manager, and with the instructions that they're post-dated and they can only cash them whenever they're due. And in fact, I actually, as a real estate investor, I have tons of real estate in this town and other towns, but my primary residence, as the time of this recording, is actually leased. And that's just the fact that I couldn't buy it, but I could lease it, and it's in a very convenient location to me and my other properties. And that's exactly what I've done with my landlord. I basically just wrote her checks for the whole year and gave her instructions to cash them whenever they're due, and everybody's really happy. Nobody has to bother with each other every month, and it's a very easy way to eliminate the headache and heartache that's associated with landlords trying to collect rent payments every month and tenants trying to remember to make the rent payments on time. So that's a very cool thing to do that you can ask your landlord about if you're a tenant. And you can, as a landlord, offer that to your tenant as well. And at this point, I'd like to add a little bit of an example of something that has occurred to me, or has actually happened to me as a landlord in the past, when I did have a situation when a tenant had absolutely the worst credit ever. And remember in the beginning of the show when I said that the two things that you need to watch out for if you're a landlord is, one, do they pay the rent on time, or do they pay the rent, period? And second is, do they take care of your property? So let me just give you an example, because this actually has happened to me. And you might hear me talk about this example before, but it was many, many years ago when I owned a condo in a condo community in Macon, Georgia. This is actually a very interesting unit because the condos were about 8 units to one building, and there was about 6 or 8 buildings, I can't remember now, in the whole complex. It was a really nice place. They had swimming pool, it had a little tennis court and little recreational ponds with little fountains. It was a really cool place to live at the time. And it was a good place for me because I didn't have to worry about taking care of the outside grounds, because that was part of what my condo association fees paid for. But there came a time that I wanted to live somewhere else. So again, my condo would have been a rental, or was on the books to become a rental, and I had to find a tenant. So I had this lady contact me, and I'm not going to divulge any names. In fact, I don't even remember the names exactly anymore. But this lady had absolutely the worst credit ever. Now, just remind you, if you're a new landlord and you're doing the property management thing yourself, you actually have to get permission from your tenants to run their credit. There are laws here in the United States that you have to follow, so you can collect their social security numbers on a rental application, but you're legally not allowed to run their credit unless they give you permission to do that. So that's just kind of like a little side note here. So this lady, she filled out a rental application, she put down her social, and she allowed me to run her credit and background check, which I then subsequently did. And her credit was just the worst. I mean, it was in the 400s. I don't even know. It was the lowest I've ever seen. And she seemed to be a really nice lady. She said she just gotten a sort of sizable inheritance from one of her parents that had passed, unfortunately, and had to split that with her brother, but she needed to get out of her parental home. She was very concerned about safety, and my condo was in a gated community, so it was a good place for her. But her credit was just really, really bad. And I basically said to her, and I did actually still make a mistake with this, but I basically said to her, hey, you said you had an inheritance. This is something she shared with me out of her own accord. I didn't ask her. But if you can give me, like, say, 6 months out of your 1-year lease worth rent payment up front, then I'll rent the place to you. And she agreed, and she paid me 6 months worth of rent up front plus the deposit, and I let her move in, and everything went really, really well for about 6 months. And right at that 6-month mark, this is a 1-year lease, she didn't pay anything else. She paid the 6 months, and that's it. And unfortunately, after about 2 months, and that's a whole nother discussion I'd love to discuss maybe on another show, and you can feel free to send me questions. Again, my email is realestate@juliamspencer.com. If you have ran into anything similar, I'd be glad to discuss it on the show. But she basically stopped paying, or maybe she never had the intention to pay anything but those 6 months. But the fact is, our lease was for 1 year and she was behind. And I had to eventually evict her. In the state of Georgia, it's actually a very easy process. It's very much favorable to the landlord. So if you're a tenant in the state of Georgia, you have not very much time to act on an eviction notice. And I will discuss the details of that here in the future. I haven't evicted anybody in a long time, but I do know how to do it. And so she had to leave. And the problem with evicting tenants is always, as a landlord, you run into the issue that a lot of tenants that depart early are disgruntled. They're unhappy. They had to leave in a rush, basically, and try to find another place and move at the last moment. In any case, the bottom line for you as a landlord is they may have trashed your place, or at least not have taken care of it as good as they should have. And for my own happiness here, in this particular case with this lady, even though she was evicted, she wasn't very nice to me on the phone. She took immaculate care of my condo. I have actually never seen any place left by a tenant as nice as she had left it. I mean, she actually cleaned the slats of the mini blinds. I don't know who does that. I don't do that. Probably nobody I know does that, but the place was immaculate. It was phenomenal. So even though I had to evict her, and even though she didn't pay me any more rent payments after the 6 months, I wasn't too unhappy with it because I was able to re-rent the place fairly quickly in the condition that it was. But it also enabled her to stay in a place for 6 months at least, even though her credit was just really, really shot. So this was an interesting experience I had with my condo tenant. I had several condo tenants in that same condo. In the end, I ended up selling the condo to a law student who was first a tenant and then later purchased the condo from me, which was a really good deal because I didn't have to pay a realtor to advertise it anywhere, which costs even more money. So we didn't have to worry about any of that. And it was actually, all in all, it was a great experience. And again, if you're a tenant, you can do this and offer your landlord any kind of amount of rent payment up front to ensure your tenancy is secured for the future. And as a landlord, you can do this to attract and keep good tenants. Now, while we're here, let's just remind you that you are listening to WRUU LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. As a business, you enjoy our programming on WRUU-LP. Please support the station with a donation. Let your customers, neighbors, and friends know that you share our vision of building a thriving community based on diverse, vibrant radio programming. As business partners, our listeners will know you support Savannah's only broad-based community radio station. Become a tower sponsor or underwriter. To check out the levels of corporate sponsorship and to donate, go to www.wruu.org/business. Again, to check out the levels of corporate sponsorship and to donate, go to www.wruu.org/business. Thank you for listening to and supporting WRUU LP. Sister Sound Showcase is a fundraiser for WRUU featuring CeCe Witt, Sarah Poole, Stace, and Josephine Johnson in the wonderful night of music at the House of Strut at 17 West 41st Street here in Savannah, Georgia. Hear all of this great music for only a $10 donation. Don't miss this evening of music and merriment on Friday, October 20th, 2017 from 8 to 11 p.m. And you are listening to Julia M. Spencer. I'm your host for Real Estate Real Talk with Julia M. Spencer. I'm a brand new host on the station, and I am exploring with you the wonderful world of real estate and all aspects of it. And our show today is focused on tenants and landlords and how tenants and landlords can become better partners in the world of real estate together and support each other. And some of the points that I've spoken to so far is some of the things that landlords can do to attract better tenants and to keep better tenants, and some of the things that tenants can do to get some of the things that they need from their landlords, for them to take care of them, or maybe give them a reduction in rent, or any other thing that a tenant may need to be comfortable in their living situation. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about, some of the next things, I have actually several that I want to talk about still, and I hope I can squeeze them all in this hour. But another thing that I have done as a landlord that helped me get and keep good tenants was to offer a maintenance option in my leases. And now this is before I used property managers. I used to do my own leases and manage my own properties. And what that actually means is in exchange for reduced rent or maybe even other incentives, I basically obligated my tenants to fix any problems promptly that are under a certain dollar amount. And usually that dollar amount was maybe around $100 or so. So that actually, as a landlord, reduced my responsibilities as the owner of the property and my expenses, of course. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the pros and cons about that and what I even mean by that. When you start having a lot of properties, and at this point I actually have a lot of them, and there's always something broken with a property. In fact, if you're a property owner, that's pretty much all you do all day long is fixing people's problems if you get pulled into that. In fact, yesterday I had an issue, actually just yesterday I had an issue with some tenants, some vacation rental guests actually, I shouldn't say tenants, and they basically had a problem with a toilet and a tub that were just draining water very slowly. So stuff was just getting backed up. It was still draining, but it wasn't going down the way it should. And of course, I had to stop what I'm doing. First off, call my warranty company, and then eventually I had to actually just call any plumber in the phone book to see if anybody can come out and basically snake my pipes from the house to the street, because obviously there was some sort of obstruction. And of course, I wanted to do other things yesterday. I was actually recording my new ebook, and I didn't have time for this. This is not something that was on my schedule yesterday, but I had to take care of it. This was a very small thing. A tenant could have easily plunged the toilet themselves, and it would have probably cleared the obstruction. And if they had any kind of handyman skills, they could have just fixed that themselves as well, with maybe I don't know, buying some sort of chemical to dump in there and let it sit for a little while. These things actually clear up pretty easily. But what I'm trying to say with all of this is as a landlord, you want to avoid people calling you for these little things. Yesterday's example may not be a good example because it could have turned into something bigger if we had a major overflow and stoppage of water. But little things like maybe exchanging light bulbs, or if a fan was wobbly a little bit. I mean, I've had people call me for the weirdest things. It's just, you don't want to get caught up with that, because you're going to be busy 8 to 10 hours a day fixing these little problems. So what you want to build into your leases as a landlord is an option for them to take care of these things themselves up to a certain dollar amount, with the possibility that if there's some sort of change or fix made, that you as a landlord can then go into the property and inspect the repair to make sure that it was done properly and didn't screw up anything even worse than it should be. Now, I want to add to this, if you are using a professional property management company, most of the professional property management companies these days actually built in a certain dollar amount that you as a landlord have to put into a certain fund, for example, $300 or so, that are then kept with the property management company, that if the tenants then call the property manager and ask him to fix something, the property manager doesn't have to bother you as the owner, as the actual landlord, to fix these little things. They'll just take the money from that fund and fix it without even bothering you. And that's actually a great thing. But what you want to do as a landlord is basically shear off all of this responsibility to other people so that you can concentrate your efforts on managing more properties and basically becoming more successful as a real estate investor. And another thing that I wanted to mention at this point is that if you have a landlord that offers you a lease with this maintenance option, it's actually a really good thing for you as a tenant too. First off, if you want to become a homeowner sometime in the future, you're going to have to learn how to fix little things anyways. Otherwise, you'd be just paying out the wazoo for all kinds of little things. And I am very much guilty of this because I can't fix anything myself at all. And it gives you a little bit more control about some of the things that you want. Maybe you want to do an upgrade at the same time as you're fixing something. Maybe an outside light is broken and you want to just fix it with something a little bit more trendier that you can get from a store, from a Home Depot store or some other store like that. So maintenance plans added to a lease are really good options. If you're a landlord, consider those. If you're a tenant, you can ask for reduced rent if those kinds of options are built into your lease as well. Now let's get to the next point, something that I've done that's kind of a little bit cheesy, but it goes a little bit into more the psychology realm of being a landlord and a tenant. And I have done this before. Make a note of your tenants' birthdays and anniversaries. Now, when they fill out a rental application with you, they will put down their birth dates, obviously, or at least they should. And you do need this information to run their background check and their financial background as well, their credit report. So make a note of it and send them a card, send them an anniversary card or some sort of gift certificate, especially if they have made their rent payments on time. It does not hurt your budget whatsoever to send them a $50 gift certificate to a home improvement store of all places, so that they then may go to the home improvement store and purchase items to improve your home with that they're living. It's a really cheesy thing. People don't do it anymore. It's kind of a little gallant thing to do. I think it's a great idea. I've done this before. Of course, if you have tenants that don't pay you and just treat your property like crap, I would probably avoid that. But I've had some very, very good tenants that have been in great communication with me about anything and everything that's broken, that have decorated my houses for Halloween and for Christmas to make them look like the best houses in the whole neighborhood. And, I want to show my appreciation for that because that saves me a lot of effort. It gives me a lot of peace. And I don't have to worry too much about my properties just going down the drain over the year that the lease is lasting. If you are a landlord, one of the things that you can do to ensure a good relationship with your tenant is to speak to them often. And I mean speak to them in person. Now, of course, don't bother them if they're busy people. Of course, people work and they're out and about. But as a landlord, basically kind of get the feel of the communication level that your tenants want from you. And also, if you're using a property manager and you are not in direct contact with your tenants, kind of get the feel from your property manager about your tenant situation. I have actually been in discussion with a lot of other real estate investors like myself, and a lot of them have perfected the art, basically, of being in communication with their tenants. In fact, very recently, I was on a trip to Nevada, to Las Vegas. I go there a couple of times a year for some auctions, real estate auctions. And one of the people there, one of the real estate investors, actually has been renting a property to a lady who has been taking care of her ailing husband for many years now. And just quite recently, that ailing husband passed away, and unfortunately, and she is now the sole tenant in that property. And he basically was very much, I was actually quite surprised, because he is a much more successful person than I am, or not yet anyways. And he's got a lot of properties, he's got a lot of tenants, a lot of real estate, a lot of land in many states. And he particularly knew this tenant, even though she was not related to him in any way or any kind of family relation. But he was aware to the situation and basically gave her a break off the rent for a month. And I thought that was a really nice thing to do. He didn't have to do this. This is not something that's required by anyone to do. But you do definitely, as a landlord, even though you are a landlord and you own the property and you're renting this expensive piece of asset to another person that's quite likely a stranger to you, you can still harbor and facilitate and basically engage with your tenant to foster a good relationship with them, because they're people just like you are, and you want to treat them, obviously the way you would want to be treated if you were a tenant. Now, I speak like this because I am actually a tenant. I'm also a landlord, and the good thing about being a landlord and tenant at the same time is because I can see both sides. And the funny thing is, I've actually in the past have published some videos on YouTube about some of my experiences with my real estate investing. And sometimes I get comments on these videos, and people are very, very angry at times. In fact, I had one person who was a tenant, and they were very angry at a video that I've left, basically describing some of the things that a landlord can and cannot do to you. And I'm just going to briefly summarize, but one of the things that I mentioned is that a landlord can't change a lease midterm, because a lease is basically a contract. It's enforceable in a court of law. So a landlord can't go 3 months into a 1-year lease and basically change the terms. It's not allowed. It's not something, unless both of you agree to it, but you can't just do that arbitrarily. And I've gotten a really angry comment about something that's not even related to that particular topic, but I had a lot of tenants basically that responded to this video and basically said, well, you're just the worst landlord ever, and I'm sure you've done this before. And I'm trying to convey with this message here on this radio station and show, but also in other places where I published my knowledge, basically, that I have been on both sides. I'm a landlord and a tenant, so I know both sides. And so interhuman relationships are important, not just in other areas of the business arena, but also definitely between tenants and landlords. And one last thing I wanted to add to this program today of how you can improve the relationship with your tenant, and if you're a tenant, how you can improve your relationship with your landlord is, as a landlord, obviously, you need to be reasonable. You need to be able to improve the property somewhat within your tenant stay. Now, in the past, what I've found is it makes it a little bit difficult to start these big improvement and fixing projects while the tenant is living there. Obviously, they don't want you walking around there with construction guys and stuff. But if something's broken or something needs to be obviously updated, if you have like a 20-year-old washer or fridge that's just basically on its last leg, you need to take care of these things, and you need to be in communication with your tenant about fixing these things, and basically giving them the option to also give you input on what is it that is required of the property. And they will be the ones that know the best, because they live there every day. They're going to tell you, okay, this light is broken, or this thing isn't working as it should be. If you are a vacation rental host, they'll tell you all kinds of things. I mean, I can make another 3 weeks of shows about being a vacation rental host here in this town of Savannah, which I am one. So we're going to do another show about this. But if you're a landlord, remember that your goal is to ensure that the tenancy is the least painful to you and your tenant, and that the tenant knows that you your place and your deal that you're offering them is the best one around, so they don't start looking for another place. And one thing that I've found is you don't have to be a smart person to realize when the economics just don't work out for you, and people will be very quick in trying to find another place to live, especially if they haven't been in your place for very long and they don't have any kind of attachment to your property. They're very easily swayable to another place, and if they're good tenants, they take care of your property, pay the rent on time, you want to keep them as long as possible. And last but not least, this is something that I have definitely made a lot of mistakes on, is I have lost my cool lots of times with my tenants. Bad thing to do, don't do it. You will not achieve anything by threatening your tenants or tenants threatening you. Try to take it several notches down. If you need to cool down, walk away and discuss the things in another way. Or better yet, if you have a spouse or somebody else that's managing the property for you or with you, or a property manager, let them handle it. Let people do their job if you hired them to do that. So just kind of cool things down and then discuss them in a civilized manner. And I have lost many good deals with landlords and tenants because I've lost my cool and they subsequently lost their cool. It's kind of like a little flimsy social skill that really doesn't have anything very specific to do with real estate investing. It's kind of like a universal thing that you can apply to all of your endeavors, but it's definitely very useful not to threaten or criticize openly or even accuse your landlord or your tenant of anything until you can calm down and look at the things in an objective manner. And with this, I'm going to go ahead and summarize some of the things that we've discussed on this show, which is some of the things of how landlords can keep their tenants happy and how tenants can get the things that they need from their landlords in order to have a happy and good place to live. One of them I've discussed was to sign a lease purchase option with the tenants, which is a very cool thing to do to give the tenants more power, decision power, decorating power, and also more of like an ownership feel to your property. Another thing that I had mentioned was to lower the rent with either successful on-time payment over several months, or give them a reduction in your fees, like a month off rent for a whole year's worth of lease payments paid up front. And as a tenant, I want to add, you don't have to make this whole entire big payment up front. You can also prepay with post-dated checks, which landlords will and property managers very much like this. I like this as a landlord, as a tenant, to get paid up front. And that's a way that you can reduce your rent significantly. Maintenance options are also a really awesome deal to give your tenant a little bit more decision power, but also to keep the little tasks off your desk if you're a landlord, and so you don't have to deal with them. That's basically giving your tenant a certain amount up to which they have to do the repairs themselves, so they don't bother you for anything that's $100 or so. If you don't use a property manager for this option, you can just tell them that up to $100, they can just do the repairs themselves and take that money off their next rent payment, as long as they give you proof that the repair was actually done via inspection, or if they give you a receipt for something they bought for the property. That's a really awesome way to kind of ensure that the property is kept in good shape and you are also not bothered with the little details. And the last two things that I mentioned were to basically keep good communications with your tenant, and if your tenant with your landlord, that can have the form of a landlord basically maybe sending birthday cards, anniversary cards, or gift cards to home improvement stores, that is, which they will use that obviously to improve your home as a landlord, which is a really awesome way. And anybody likes a gift card, and anybody likes shopping, at least most people. I do. And the very last thing is to basically keep you cool. Treat your tenants as humans, your fellow humans, And if you are a tenant, also remember that your landlord has probably lots of other properties, lots of other tenants, and just, also give them a break. Don't expect them to serve you exclusively. Treat each other as good human beings, in a civil manner. Don't threaten, don't accuse, don't yell. There's always a way to work problems out in a civilized manner. And I hope you found this show informative and it helped you a little bit if you're a tenant or a landlord. I hope you can tune in again next week at the same time. And you are listening to Julia M. Spencer, my newest radio show where we explore anything and everything related to real estate. Real Estate Real Talk with Julia M. Spencer. Thank you so much for listening.
For your free guide to real estate investing, visit juliamspencer.com.